Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we're airing ABA's 2022 Fall Regional Association Tradeshow education, Decoding the P&amp for booksellers, managers, and owners. My name is Kim Hoiber. I'm the Director of Education for the American Booksellers Association, and I am here with Allison Hill, the CEO of the ABA, and we are here today to present Decoding the P&amp for booksellers, managers, and owners. We had the incredible opportunity of presenting this session at most of the fall regionals this year, which is 2022, for future people watching this. And so we'll be showing this to y'all now. Just to give a quick background to Allison and my experience, I'll speak to myself and then I'll let Allison speak for herself. I came to ABA only about 6 months ago. Prior to this, I worked at, I managed Third Place Books Seward Park in Seattle, Washington. Prior to that, I was at Elliott Bay Book Company, also in Seattle. Prior to that, I helped open Word Jersey City. And prior to that, I worked for 5-6 years at Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. So I'm very much coming to you from the bookseller side of things when presenting this session. And Allison also fairly recently came to us from the bookselling world, so I'll let her list off her resume.
Thanks, Kim. Yes, so I am a former bookseller as well, and I have about 25 plus years of bookselling at Waterstones, Book Soup, and Broman's. So like Kim said, we both come to this very much from a bookseller perspective and are very excited to present.
Yeah. I know that doesn't sound like the sexiest of sessions, but hopefully we'll keep it entertaining and go from there. So decoding the P&amp. The P&amp is the profit and loss statement, which is a critical tool for evaluating a store's overall performance. Over the next 50 minutes or so, we're going to walk through a bookstore's P&amp to follow the money and see where it goes. In the hopes of laying the groundwork for understanding bookstore finances and identifying opportunities for improved profitability on individual line items.
We have talked about this session a lot, and it's evolved a lot in some ways because of the feedback that we got along the way at the fall shows, as Kim mentioned. But what has stayed the same from the beginning was our intention behind this session. We really wanted to create something that worked for both bookstore owners and booksellers. From a bookstore owner perspective, we really wanted to create an opportunity for people to stop and spend some time thinking about their financials in a deeper way. So often when you're running bookstores, you are busy putting out fires so much of the time. And we really wanted to shift from that firefighting mode to just that contemplative analysis of your financials and spending some time on them. So we thought this was a good way to do it and a good way for you to look through your P&amp to find opportunities to improve your profitability or identify potential problems that need to be addressed. We also wanted to do something for booksellers who were maybe a little less familiar with bookstore financials. We think that's really, really important to help develop booksellers and give them that understanding and empower them. From my perspective, when I started at Waterstones, looking back at my time there, I did a lot of things that impacted their bottom line. I was in charge of remainder buying, and I did things around events, and I managed payroll. Yet I had no understanding of the bigger picture. I had never seen a bookstore P&amp. So we think it's really valuable for everyone in a store to have an understanding of what it takes to run the store. Kim, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, so we're also hoping that this session is a model for how you can have really productive and collaborative conversations between staff and owners and managers. A lot of times there's a scary moralistic quality that goes into any sort of financial discussions. And so especially within the context of various power hierarchies, we wanted to ensure that we're able to lay a groundwork for a solid understanding and cooperative conversation around finances.
There are a couple of reasons why Kim and I both feel this is really important, and we have a couple of stories to illustrate this point. One, some of you may be familiar with because it was shared at the union session that was featured during Snow Days a couple of years ago, one of our virtual conferences, and it was two lawyers talking about unionization. One represented owners, one represented workers. And one of them shared the story of the Democratic National Committee, and employees had served the management with union cards, and management had expressed to the attorney that they were really shocked by this and really upset by it, that they saw it as an indicator that staff was very unhappy and this was surprising to them. But what the lawyer shared with them was that it was quite the opposite, that in this case, the workers were wanting to unionize because they were so invested in the DNC. They wanted more voice. They wanted to feel more empowered. They wanted to be more involved in things. They really wanted to be part of it in a bigger way. And that was why they were choosing to unionize. So even though everybody's situation is different, and for some bookstores, unionization is a path, and for others, it may be communication like what we're going to demonstrate today to help workers and employees feel empowered and part of things and to give them a voice. The other story that we'll share is something that I used to do at stores I've worked at in the past, which was the olive contest. So years ago, you may recall the glory days of flying when they used to feed us on flights. And believe it or not, they used to serve us salads before you even got your entree. And American Airlines served salads that had 4 items on them. Let's say it was lettuce, cucumber, tomatoes, and olives. One of the flight attendants noticed that 80% of the time, the passengers were picking off the olives. So she mentioned this to management, and they looked into it with their vendor, and it turned out that they were paying for salads with 3 items. And then for every additional item, they were paying an additional fee. By eliminating olives, they saved $40,000 the first year. So the thinking here is that often frontline booksellers are the ones who can see things that maybe owners and management haven't noticed. There may be opportunities or ideas that they have. There may be things that they question that when you dig into it, reveal opportunities. So I always ran a Vroman's olive contest when I was there, and once a year, anyone in the company could contribute ideas or suggestions along these lines, ways that Vroman's could potentially save money or improve the efficiency of the store. And there were big prizes involved, and it was very exciting. To give you an example that I think probably too many of us can relate to, Kim and I have laughed about this, I had a receiver fill out the Olive Award application, and what she said was, there's this thing I do that I don't know why I do it. And the thing she did was when checking in books, they would come in and she would have a packing slip and she would check them off against the packing slip. She would enter information into the computer with the invoice. She would go through this whole process and print something out. And then she would do this second process in the computer and print this second document out and sign off on it and send that document to accounting. And she said, I don't know why I do this. This perhaps could be something that is an olive. So I went to accounting because my thinking was, I don't know why we do this either. It's the way we've always done it. So I go to accounting and I asked them, and the person I asked looked at it and said, that's so funny. I've always wondered why we do that. I throw those away. So 50 to 200 times a day, this document got thrown away. Now, this isn't huge, right? But we are talking printer ink, paper, time, all of these things, right? And they add up. And that's the thing about book selling, is that it all adds up. It's such a thin margin in this business that these little things actually really do matter. So with those kinds of things in mind, we think that these are important conversations to be having that prompt this kind of thinking and innovation. Kim, I know you have your own example of this that I
Yeah,
really
I
want.
mean, one of those things of these are ways we've always done it. When mailing or freight for returns, we would always do FedEx because it was insured, and we always wanted to make sure that the books got back to the publisher. And I was talking to somebody actually at one of the regionals at PNBA one year, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we ran the numbers and we send everything media mail now." And I was like, "Well, you can't do that. That's ridiculous. Like it's not insured. Like what happens if the box disappears?" And they're like, "Yeah, we ran the numbers and we lost one box every 2 years, and the amount of money that we lost in that one box was way less than the amount of money that we were paying for a more expensive freight carrier with insurance." And so having run that, we decided we were fine with losing this thing. But it's one of those things, like Allison said, like this is something we do it because we've always done it that way. And part of the joy of being on the front line of book selling is that you have these opportunities for innovation that in these seemingly small things can really add up.
Yeah, what I love about both of these stories is that it speaks to how much digging into your financials is about challenging assumptions, right?
Mhm.
Why have we done this in the past? Why are we doing it this way? How could we do it differently? What are we assuming that maybe we need to take a fresh look at? So I love those examples. And the thing about all of this is the end game here is, from my perspective and Kim's perspective, livable wage for booksellers and bookstore owners. So running stores that are sustainable, that are profitable, and that can support booksellers and bookstore owners.
Yeah. And so all of that has to start with a solid and strong understanding from all parties about where the finances come from and where they go. If we're only seeing the cash coming through the register, we're not actually going to understand how that affects our bottom line. So there are a lot of different ways that we can talk to staff about bookstore finances. So this is the part where if we were in person, Allison would have actually provided pie. So I apologize for the virtual world that we live in. But having different ways of visualizing finances. When you talk to a staff member, I had the sales data, this big old spreadsheet that I had shared with all of my staff at Seward Park. And I was like, I have this available. They can look at it all anytime. But when it comes down to it, they would see all of these numbers on a page and it would just go straight over their head because they're like, that doesn't tell me a story. And so trying to figure out ways in which we can tell a story and find ways to educate folks in meaningful manners. So visual examples like this. So Allison apparently would actually bring pie to financial literacy discussions at Vromans, which again, between olives and pie, I'm just super solid on Vromans now. So bringing pie to actually give a good physical and delicious example of the bookstore finances. So we've got a pie. We all understand what pie looks like. We can also then look at that within the context of what our actual finances are. So when showing staff what a bookstore finances are, the question that we ask, and Allison talks about asking this at Vromans, I was asked this at Elliott Bay, I was asked this at Third Place. When you ask a bookseller, where does all our money go? Their first answer is almost always payroll. They think that the vast majority of the money goes towards payroll because that's what they're thinking of first. But the reality is that the vast majority of the money that comes in goes right back out into stocking more inventory. And so without being able to see that on a visual manner like this, you're not really going to necessarily think about it. Looking at this like a pie, we've got our cost of goods sold, and we will go through and actually talk about what all this means. So we've got the cost of goods sold. So that's the cost of the inventory that we put on our shelves that we can then sell to customers. After that is our payroll slice. So again, a really solid amount, and that we'll again talk more about later what goes into that. Occupancy, so whether that's rent or mortgage, along with any repair costs or improvements that need to happen to the physical space, as well as keeping the lights on. Operations is going to be actually the part of the pie that we're going to talk the most about, because even though that 11.7% doesn't look that big, It's got a lot of opportunities for growth. That's where the olives are going to live. And then that little red slice at the top, that's what I keep calling the no thank you helping, but that's actually the profit. So again, as we all know, bookstores are not a hugely high margin business. And so our opportunities here, a lot of times we're talking about ways in which we can grow the size of the pie. So we want to have more sales. We want to figure out B2B opportunities. We want to figure out ways to reach more customers. So a lot of the sessions that we do in education are about growing the size of the pie. This particular session isn't about growing the size of the pie. It's actually just about rearranging the slices so that little no thank you helping of the net operating profit, we can actually make the slice of the pie bigger because we're just going to be moving things around. The pie itself is going to stay the same. And there are a couple of different ways that we can talk about this. If you're not going to be talking to folks who are into pie, gluten intolerance is definitely a thing. You can also have different conversations within the context of money, which is what we're talking about, but figuring out ways to actually break that money down into understandable chunks. There's a great book by Chip Heath called Making Numbers Count, where he talks about the fact that math isn't actually a native language for humans. We use it as a translation tool, but it's not actually native to ourselves as humans. What is native are stories. And so if we're able to actually identify ways to talk about things in a meaningful story-based manner, so taking these big numbers and bringing them down to something that's actually recognizable. So if we're talking about a single book, or a $100 bill, how much of that $100 bill gets actually broken up for cost of goods versus payroll? And I've actually talked to multiple stores that when they're onboarding staff will actually have a $20 bill and they'll make change and say, okay, this $10.50 is going towards more books. And this, $3 here is going towards payroll. And so you can actually break it down by making that number smaller. It makes it more of a story that is understandable to humans. So when we're not talking about pie or small numbers with data, there are a lot of opportunities that most business owners will use that constitute a financial dashboard. Bookstores traditionally haven't always been awesome at this. So the large piles of boxes of bank statements end up being part of the financial dashboard. I have seen those boxes in your back rooms. I definitely know that they are there. I have moved many of them. I have built forts. That is not, in fact, a legitimate way to run the business. How long do you keep those receipts? Who knows? The haphazard math on random bar napkins, trying to figure out your cost of goods. I've seen that way of running your finances. And then there's that spreadsheet that's been there for 10 years that only you understand. And if that anybody else touches it, will definitely break. I understand that as well as a general form of financial statements that bookstores will use. There are, in fact, better tools out there. So an actual financial dashboard will have a variety of different reports. So you'll have your budget, you'll have your profit and loss statement, your balance sheet, your cash flow statement, and then accounts payable and receivable. We're going to primarily focus on the profit and loss statement here just for the ability to just have a single one to look at. But Allison, do you want to give a quick rundown of the other four?
Sure. Balance sheet is kind of a snapshot of a store's assets and liabilities. So liability example would be money you owe the publishers. An asset would be your inventory or the cash you have in the bank. Cash flow statement is your cash in and out. So as you're trying to anticipate the need to pay for things, say, going into the holidays, that would be part of a cash flow projection and cash flow statement. Accounts payable and accounts receivable aren't typically part of the basic accounting package, but we think it's really important to call out since those things can get a little bit inflated, and sometimes if you're not tracking them carefully, they can cause problems with, say, cash flow. And then budget, which I know sometimes that word strikes fear in a lot of booksellers' heart because it seems like such a gigantic task for people to take on. Some stores have budgets, some stores are operating without a budget. I would say that a budget is one of the most critical tools that you have, and that it can be really simple to get started, that you can just take your P&L statement and create a new column and move everything over and then make some assumptions for the new year. So I assume my sales are going to be flat next year. I know my rent is going up next year. I assume my payroll will go up next year, and just pull those numbers through to create a very basic roadmap for your store to follow, so that you know when you're off the map and you need to make adjustments in the course of the year. Obviously, budgets can be much more detailed and nuanced than that, but just to give you an idea of something you could do to start if you haven't already.
And in bookselling, we actually have some really fantastic non-normative financial statements and tools that can be used. So you'll hear us talk about ABACUS. The ABACUS is a report that just came out, if you're watching this fairly live, and it's a financial benchmarking report for independent bookstores. So I have been at conferences for over a decade hearing about the incredible asset that is ABACUS, and I have never actually seen an ABACUS report for one of my stores. We just never got around to it. It's an incredible tool. It's really just a P&L, but a P&L that's actually populated by data from bookstores across the country. So that way you can actually look and compare your store's profit and loss statement and your store's specific data to that of bookstores nationally. The cool thing is also, if you're going to get all data nerd about it, which I totally do, you can actually break it down not just by national stores, but by stores that are comparable sizes to yours. So a store that is making under $300,000 a year in net sales is going to have a very different operations budget than a store that's making over $2 million a year. And so being able to look at size by size comparisons, and this year, 2022, was actually the first year that we were able to look at the data for our regional associations. So when we were going around to the different fall regional shows, we were actually able to present data from those regions and say, hey, here's how the bookstores in your area in this very specific region are doing, so that you can look at your own data in response to that. The key is that it's not necessarily a report card per se. Like, it is a performance based information tool. So just because your numbers are different from the national numbers or the regional numbers or whatever, this is a benchmark. It's not telling you whether you're good or bad. It is telling you what you should maybe be taking a look at. So if your payroll is higher because you're in an urban center with a higher cost of living, that's okay. You don't need to make it the exact same as a store that's in a suburban or a rural area. That's totally fine. It just means that when we're looking at the same pie size, we're going to have to shift those pie slices around so we still have that at least no thank you helping of pie and the net operating profit. So.
And if you think about the time we carved out for you to spend some time on your financials, this is what you would have in your hand as you were looking at them. You would have the ABACUS report, whether it's the owner or the manager looking at the financials, or whether you're having a conversation with your staff, to have the ABACUS numbers side by side with your own store financials. You can look, as Kim said, where things may be different, and then ask a lot of questions about it. Why are these numbers different? Is it just the circumstances of our particular marketplace, or is it an indication that we are missing some potential, or missing an opportunity, or there's a problem that we may not be aware of? So we find it to be a really helpful tool to that end. And then Kim has listed a bunch of other tools that are kind of metrics within the bookselling industry that you can also track to that end. And, a couple just to call out here would be something like average spend. This is such a great conversation to have in a store, because the dollar per transaction, the amount each individual is spending, can be influenced significantly by interactions with booksellers. We've all seen it, right? I mean, we've all seen a bookseller have a conversation with a customer who's coming in to buy one book and leaves with 10 books, right? So that's a great example of where training and conversation around dollar per transaction can really be impactful. Another one that's really important is turn. For those who don't understand that term, as basic as possible, if you have $10 worth of inventory and you sell in a section and you sell $100 worth of it in a year, you've turned that section 10 times. So there may be sections that are turning low that you want to take a look at and see, wonder why that is. Seems like we should be turning higher. Children's, for example, since we know children's sales have been growing in recent years, or maybe you have a turn that's high that might indicate maybe that section could be even bigger and you could explore the space.
I think romance is a really good indication of that, where we saw turns getting too high, and the reality is that means we were losing sales in that section by not having enough inventory.
Great example. That's a great example. And sometimes a section has low turn and it's part of your store's mission or values, say poetry, where you would leave it be, but you've at least made a conscious decision around that. I think that's a really, really important thing. I'll give you an example on turn. When I was at Vroman's, the Borders down the street closed. And I was very excited in terms of what it would mean for our graphic novel section, because I knew we would inherit all of those graphic novel customers. And I was seeing sales in that area being generated, but when I would quickly just check the turns weren't getting better. So it gave me a chance to stop and really dig into the numbers and look at it all. And what I discovered was that we had inherited the graphic novel customers from Borders, and we had inherited the graphic novel shoplifters from Borders. So at Vroman's, we really had to look at, okay, our inventory must be off, and we need to dig into this and see what problems we need to address. So that's a good example of where watching those metrics might give you additional information that isn't conveyed in, say, the sales numbers.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of those KPIs or key performance indicators, I feel like half of the business terminology is just there to justify business schools. But half of these indicators of your performance are actually available in ABACUS as well, which is really cool. So you're not just looking at a profit and loss statement to the national average. You're also able to look in ABACUS at things like productivity ratios for staff. So like how many sales per full-time equivalent employee and stuff like that. So there's some cool data there that you can also play with.
Sales per square foot is the other big one, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So Allison and I have a bit of an issue with this slide deck. I made it, but there were too many cats. So you'll notice that I tried to give Allison some dogs as well, and there are a weird number of, there are a shocking number of cute animals on the internet with ABACUS toys. So anyway, that's that. So the P&L, what is the P&L? Again, finding terms to justify MBA's continued existence. P&L is a profit and loss statement. It is the exact same thing that you'll hear people refer to as an income statement, and also the exact same thing as a statement of operations. Again, three different names for it, all the same thing. It, on a very basic level, is a simple equation that is just the revenue that you bring in minus the expenses that it took you to sell that or to make that revenue, and that equals your profit, or if you're not having a great year, your loss. So hopefully profit, even if it's a no thank you serving. So that is a profit and loss statement in a very basic nutshell. That said, I do want to stop real quick and give a very speedy breakdown of some terms. So gross versus net was utterly confusing to me for the longest time. So gross is the numbers before expenses or discounts are deducted, and net is the number after expenses are accounted for. So there's this picture that I thought was just like changed the way that I think about it. Again, we're storytellers in our minds. So visualizing it this way helped me so much. You've got your profit and loss statement with your gross revenue and your gross profit, and that goes into the net. And so whatever comes through the net is the net income that you have. One of my friends who at P&BA was actually mentioning, oh yeah, I always thought about like a butterfly net. So like whatever you catch is in the net is your net income. So that helps too. Cost of goods sold, you'll also see referred to as COGS. is very basically, there's more to it that PK would be happy to give you a whole rundown on, but the very basic understanding of cost of goods sold is just how much money you paid for your inventory. That does include freight, both in and out. I'm waiting for, yes, in and out. So if you're sending returns back, that is included in your cost of goods sold. But cost of goods sold, very basically, is just how much money you paid for your inventory. So as a frontline bookseller, I worked in receiving for a lot of my career, and so I'm used to really seeing the invoices or the packing slips or whatever, little slip of paper Hachette is now deciding to send us on a receipt printer. But essentially, the easiest way for me to understand the profit and loss statement was by looking at just a single book. So we've got this one book with a $20 retail price. That $20 is printed on the book. So if we're going to get a 45% discount from this publisher for this $20 book, the net sales when I sell that book is $20. The cost of goods sold, so how much I paid for that book, so after my 45% discount, I paid $11 for that book, which gives me $9 left over for everything else. So that's your gross margin, is that $9 that you got left over after your 45% discount. Obviously, 45% is what's coming from this one book from the publisher. There's a reason why we also want to diversify our inventory by bumping up the percentage on other items so that we have a better discount structure. So our gross margin here is $9. So that's how much money I've got to play with. So after I've got payroll, so I stole these numbers from the ABACUS preliminary numbers. So based on the percentage from ABACUS, so our payroll from that $9 is going to be $4.78 for this one book. So that's getting handed over for payroll. I've got $1.92 that's getting handed over for occupancy, and I've got $2.20 that's being handed over into that operations slice of the pie. That leaves my total expenses for this one $20 book at about $8.90. Which in this particular example leaves me a whopping 10 cents of net operating profit. So again, that no thank you serving is very, very no thank you-y. That 10 cents is not much for us to actually play with profit-wise.
Yeah, that's that slim margin we were talking about. And just to note here, so your net sales are your sales minus discounts. So for those of you who are discounting in your stores, you really want to think about the impact. And again, this is an example of where you would just challenge your assumptions. Mm-hmm. For some stores, discounting is really important to their market and to their customers and is necessary. For other stores, it may not be. The example I would give is a bookstore that opened in Beverly Hills just off of Rodeo Drive. And I was in visiting when they first opened, and they had a big bestseller table with stacks of bestsellers that were 20% off. And again, I watched customers come in with Coach bags and Gucci bags and shopping bags from all over Rodeo Drive, shop the bestseller table, pile up the books, get to the counter. And when the bookseller would say, oh, and you get 20% off, they were like, oh, really? Great. But it wasn't driving their purchases. It wasn't front of mind for them at all. So removing that discount probably wouldn't have any impact at all. So it's definitely something to think about.
Yeah, and especially in our fun world of showrooming, people understand that they can get the book for a lot less, and they're shopping with you because they want to support your business. So again, discounts can be an extremely important strategic tool, but that is coming out of your net sales. So if you're doing a 10% discount, you're now talking $18 as your net sale, and you are going to be in the negative profit-wise, and you get no pie whatsoever. So
the context to that too is that we always think of ourselves as a goods business. We sell books, we sell a good, but the truth is independent bookstores, because of the value proposition that we're all offering, we're a service business too. So remember that people are often shopping with you for the service component, the recommendations, the personal connections, the gathering place, all of those things rather than the good itself.
Totally. So that's the very basic, and again, there's a lot more nuance to it, but that is a very basic example of what a profit and loss statement on a $20 retail book with a 45% discount looks like. What does that actually look like for a bookstore? So these numbers are from our preliminary ABACUS data. So if you're looking at this versus the actual ABACUS report that came out, they're a little different. So my apologies on that. I was doing this on a plane on my way to New Orleans. So we have here what you're actually going to see within the context of an income statement, which again, same thing as a P&L, same thing as profit and loss, same thing as a statement of operations. So the income statement here, we've got all of our line items on the side. So we've got that net sale, that cost of goods sold, the gross margin of money that I've got going back, your payroll, occupancy, operations, and your total expenses. So we can see here for all stores, we're looking at $573,335 is the median data for all stores for the net sales. So, and here we're going to be using 3 different examples of stores that are under $350,000 that they're making in a year in revenue, then $350,000 to $1 million, and then over $1 million. So again, we're going to be seeing some slight but significant differentiations between those numbers so that you can kind of put your bookstore's context in an apples to apples situation. So we're going to be looking at most of these within the context of percentages because, again, we're looking at the pie here. So we're trying to move around the slices of pie, not necessarily put an immediate dollar value on them. So here is our statement from earlier that we were looking at from the basic P&L with the ABACUS numbers. There is a line you'll notice at the very end. You got your net operating profit, and then you have your net income after other revenue and expenses. So we go all of a sudden from 0.9%, which again, very slim profit margin, to 6.4%, which is a lot better. We're going to talk about what that difference is. The answer is yay, but also we've got some caution that we need to discuss at the very end of this. So this is what our net income statement does in fact look like. Again, sometimes it is easier for folks to be looking at this visually. So this is that green column there of the median numbers, looking at the cost of goods sold here, which is that 53.9%. We've got our no thank you helping of 9% up at the top, and your payroll is your second largest after cost of goods sold, operations, and occupancy. And again, we're going to be talking about those numbers coming up. So cost of goods sold. So obviously this is the biggest part of the pie, and most of the education that ABA and the regionals put out is about how to increase your cost of goods sold within the context of diversifying your inventory, stock offers, and direct buying. So we're not going to take a ton of time to talk about this, but we did want to hit those 3 things very quickly to talk about how we can shrink that part of the pie just a little bit. So direct buying. A lot of stores, when they start out especially, will start with just a single account with Ingram, for example. So a wholesaler, obviously, you're going to be getting a lower discount from a wholesaler than you will from a publisher. It is a good amount of effort to be opening accounts, obviously, with publishers, but you're going to immediately increase the discounts you're able to get, and you're going to be able to shrink that big cost of goods sold part of the pie immediately by doing direct orders. So even if it seems like a lot of work right now, if you're only ordering through Ingram at this moment, find one major publisher that you sell a lot of books on, whether that's PRH, or if you're a big sci-fi store, maybe you want Macmillan for their tour imprint. Whatever it is that you really are focusing on in your sales, just open one account. Find your rep. You can get a list, or you can reach out to our membership folks. They'll match you up with your local publisher reps, get you started. That way you can at least get that higher discount from one of the publishers.
And if you're a new store and that just seems a little bit too much at this moment, put a reminder on your calendar for 9 months from now to revisit it. Because what we find often at ABA is a store opens, they set up accounts with a wholesaler, and a year passes, 2 years pass, 3 years pass, and they still haven't moved into ordering some of their inventory, at least from publishers. And as Kim said, it makes a significant difference in your cost of goods and in your bottom line.
The wholesalers are like, well, Ingram, I'll stop using plurals here, unfortunately. Ingram is an incredible resource, especially in trying to make sure that you're getting your customers books in a timely manner, that you're getting books on the shelf in a timely manner. They're a great partner to have, really important. They have some good opening order programs that you can be able to do. That said, you do want to make sure you get at least one more. It's going to help that cost of goods sold. The second opportunity is stock offers. So all the time, we hear booksellers saying, if only I had, publishers gave us another 5%. If only we were able to get a better discount structure, we'd be able to pay our rent, increase our payroll, pay a living wage. The reality is that while we are working towards that as an industry, by all means, getting a better discount overall, right now publishers are in fact offering better discounts in certain ways. So we have stock offers, for example, for Indies First right now, leading up to the holiday season, and actually for the last 10 years leading up to the holiday season, publishers have offered these stock offers that have been up to 5% discount in addition to your regular terms. So they're actually giving us that 5% discount. It's a little harder to get than we would like, but they are in fact doing it and offering some great incentives. And unfortunately, if we're not using those, they're going to stop offering them because it doesn't look like we want them. So if you go onto BookWeb, this slide deck is also available on BookWeb and has a hyperlink there for Indies First. There's an entire spreadsheet that is updated frequently with all the stock offers from your big publishers, your indie publishers. We have so many opportunities that are being presented to us every year just for Indies First to make sure that you can actually stock up for the holidays and get those better terms. So immediately being able to increase your cost of goods.
The other place you can find some of the stock offers that periodically pop up during the course of the year are in the Book Buyer's Handbook, which you can also find on BookWeb under the Booksellers on the navigation bar, and then Book Buyer's Handbook. And as Kim said, it is really important that people take advantage of these. As an example, we had a publisher say that with Indies First, they only had about 200 stores participating. But this was a publisher that definitely a lot of stores could benefit from having that additional discount in the fourth quarter. So we hope that you'll take a look.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of times it's really hard to stop what you're doing from your regular ordering schedule. You're hyping up for the holidays. You're onboarding the last few staff members for the seasonal rush. I totally get it. Skip an order 1 week and then send 2 weeks worth of orders the next week with that stock offer. You can make it part of your regular routine and do what you can to at least be able to get this this discount. Ingram also does give a +3% discount for Indies First. They also do extra discounts on holiday catalog titles for all of the regionals, which is really awesome because you're going to get stuff that is actually really good for your specific customer base, but also holiday catalogs are going to have some of the biggest name books through the year. So some good opportunities there to, again, get that piece of the pie a little smaller. The last thing, and again, we have a slew of education about this. We're going to have a whole education section at Winter Institute in Seattle. Come visit me. In Seattle this coming year, diversifying your inventory. So whether that's used books, remainders, or non-book items / sidelines, you have more control over. You're not going to be just looking at an invoice that says this is a $20 book with a 45% discount. You have a lot more control with used, remainder, and non-book items in your pricing structures, because you can actually get a 70% markup on a used book. You can buy remainders for $1 and be able to sell them for $8. You can get sidelines that aren't actually going to have a price printed on the product. And so you're going to have a lot more flexibility in getting those discounts higher if you're ordering through not just the new book silo.
And the great thing about that is that you're improving your cost of goods, which absolutely improves your bottom line. But also going back to those other metrics, you may be increasing the dollar per transaction because you're providing your customers with additional merchandise to choose from that they might not have planned on buying. So it's those types of things that are real drivers.
And we all know that socks can be very annoying, but when it comes down to it, tossing some socks on top of a stack of books is a great way to throw a little extra money your way. So what does that then look like? We've already talked about cost of goods a little bit. We've got our no thank you, but there's still three segments of the pie of expenses that are really important. So again, we're going to talk very, very briefly about occupancy and payroll, and then we'll spend the rest of the time talking about our operations. Payroll, that's our big blue part of the pie there. So when talking about payroll in our stores, it's really helpful to recognize that a staff member talking about payroll and an owner or a financial manager talking about payroll, they're actually talking about two different numbers. So the staff member is normally thinking about the payroll within the context of what is actually going into their bank account, which, when you're trying to pay bills and make sure that you can pay rent, means a lot. And so when we're actually having this conversation, we need to recognize that a staff member is generally talking about what's coming into their bank account, whereas the owner is probably talking about other things that also include the employer share of payroll taxes, various insurance, 401ks, retirement contributions, paid time off. There's a lot that the number is a lot bigger for the owner or manager. And so again, we can't really have conversations about payroll if we're not actually talking about the same number.
The other thing we wanted to say about payroll is that as an industry, we're really shifting from what some of you may remember as the 2% solution and figuring out how to decrease payroll to a new world where we're talking about not how to decrease payroll, but how to approach it more strategically, or how to manage payroll, how to think of it in new terms, again, with that end goal of providing livable wage and driving your business, because we all know how important booksellers are to bookstores. So, when you think about this, there are different ways to approach it strategically. One might be looking at the distribution of your payroll. If your busiest days are Tuesdays and Saturdays, but your payroll looks the same every day, meaning your staffing is the same every day, perhaps you want to reevaluate that and shift people around so that you have more people working on your busy days, fewer people working on your less busy days. You're using your payroll more strategically. Another thing we saw a lot during the pandemic was stores reconsider, again, challenge your assumptions, their store hours. So I'll give the example of Tubby & Coos in New Orleans. They are only open from 3 to 7 p.m. now, which it seems surprising, but what the owner figured out was that most of their customers were coming after school, after work, and they changed their hours during the pandemic. Their sales stayed the same. So this means in a small store like that, they don't have to worry about having another person on, perhaps because they don't have as much coverage that's necessary. So these are the kinds of things you want to look at when you're talking about payroll.
And a lot of our point of sale systems do, in fact, let you just do a really quick report of the breakdown of sales per hour. So looking at that report, I know that we were doing that at Third Place when we were looking at our reopening. And right now, the nice thing is that customers are expecting things to be a little more fluid. We have the opportunity right now to say we're going to just be closed on Mondays. Like Broadway Books in Portland is just closed on Mondays. They're in the store, they're receiving, but they're not open to customers. That means they can get a lot of work done. And right now, their customers haven't really pushed back on that in the same way that I think we would have seen prior to the pandemic. So a lot of stores are also going that route. The other thing within the context of payroll that's really important to talk about is the importance of employee retention. So employee turnover is extremely costly. There's quite a few different metrics that have come up. Gallup had a great report talking about the actual cost of employee turnover, but for an entry-level position, turnover costs can be 30 to 50% of the annual salary, just in the cost of interviewing, hiring, onboarding, and training. And as Allison pointed out earlier, we are kind of moving away from considering bookstores as a goods-based system. We are also a service-based system, and service is based on the experience and the expertise of the people who are serving. And so if we're losing that amount of money, or if we're losing those folks, we're losing a lot of money. So the average turnover cost for an employee earning $8 an hour could be over $5,000. And so really taking a look at retention as a cost-saving benefit.
This is really so critical to the industry, especially this year as a lot of stores have experienced a lot of turnover more recently. But if you think about it, say the holiday season, I always think about it as the Olympics of book selling. We've been training all year for this, right? But if a lot of your booksellers are new and they haven't been training all year, they don't necessarily have the same breadth of knowledge of backlists, say, or the recognition of an author's name and what else to recommend for a customer. So turnover really does impact your business in significant ways. And that livable wage is so important, but it's the foundation. There are a lot of other things to lay on top of that to help with attrition. We talked about some of it earlier, communication, empowering staff, having this full conversation with them. But Kim, you want to speak to some of the other things that we've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, being able to maintain staff, even in non-monetary ways, the fact is that work-life balance is such an incredibly important thing. Mental health has taken a hit all across the board, and so ensuring that you have an environment that is really employee focused and employee centric, because the reality is that although we are customer-oriented businesses, by being employee first, we are in fact actually able to give a better service for our customers. So the more employee first mentalities that we can really bring through, the better. And again, there are a lot of non-monetary ways that we can do that. When we're talking about payroll, it's a lot of money to be looking, but things like professional development opportunities, sending your staff to conferences, whether that's the national conferences or your regionals, which are a great opportunity for staff to be able to meet folks who are outside of their myopic understanding of your like specific store, and looking and being able to see, hey, this is a larger community that I am part of. That can make such a huge difference. Make sure you pay staff when you send them to conferences, because they are going to bring back great opportunities and knowledge, like this session, for example, that will in fact be able to ensure the financial success of your store as well. So it's a good investment to make that doesn't look like a line on payroll. So occupancy, again, we're not going to talk a ton about, but it is a good almost 10% of the pie. So we do want to make sure we mention it really quickly. Allison, I put another cat in there for you. They keep popping up.
I so appreciate you. Yeah, there's not a lot for us to say here. You know, you have your rent or your mortgage, and maybe it is what it is, but we will say that ABACUS is a great tool for helping your landlord understand your model, and perhaps gives you a tool to negotiate when you're in a rent negotiation. Also say, for those of you who've been approached by developers who say they want you to open a second location in their development, I've had this experience a lot where developers call and they say, we want a bookstore more than anything. We just think an independent bookstore would just make this development. And I say, great, this is what I would need for the rent. And they say, maybe not. And I assume they get another anthropology, given the number of anthropologies I see in the world. So, you know, when you're talking to those developers, again, ABACUS is a way for them to really understand the model and what it would take to have something as valuable as an independent bookstore in their development. The only other thing I wanted to add was that coming out of the pandemic, we've definitely seen, you know, some new, I don't know, flexibility around occupancy with stores who have found opportunities to buy their building after thinking that was never going to be possible, either because of empty storefronts in their area, or I'm thinking of one store that crowdfunded the down payment when they were going to lose their space, and then negotiated with their landlord and worked out a deal, and they suddenly were able to buy a building that they didn't think they ever would. So just knowing that these opportunities are sometimes out there, and again, challenging your assumptions about what's impossible, and reaching out to ABA, because that's an area that we've been able to help a lot of people with the last few years.
Yeah, I think so many people during the pandemic, they looked around them at their communities, and really, I think a lot of the data we've been seeing from bookstores as well as anecdotally, like people looked around and said, I want a bookstore here. And so people are a lot more willing to put their money where their mouth is, and actually shop at bookstores and support a bookstore coming into a space that they might not have been interested in prior to this. So again, some opportunities, challenging the assumptions. So the part of the pie that really is going to have the opportunity for those olives is the operating expenses, which again, not the sexiest part of the P&L. That's a statement that most people would not have put that together. But operating expenses have a lot of opportunities for very small tweaks that can add up to a lot. When we're talking about such a small margin business, an 11.7% chunk of the pie is huge still. And there are definitely some points in this that that can be really, really useful. So there is a complete list of the expense lines that are included in all of these available on BookWeb. I found it super helpful when looking through this. Things like co-op should go into advertising and promotion, stuff like that. That's all listed on BookWeb if you want to take a look at like drilling down. But we're going to actually go through and do a very quick little experiment here called a Jamboard. So we went through during the regionals and we made a Jamboard, which is essentially just a collaborative whiteboard that we can all add little sticky notes to, indicating different ideas for olives that folks can bring about. So you can get a link to the Jamboard on BookWeb under the decoding education thing. So we're going to go through this Jamboard line by line through the expenses and kind of just talk about some very quick ideas for olives and those opportunities. And then folks can actually go through and add more sticky notes to indicate other little olives that you found in your different P&L line items.
If you haven't used a Jamboard before, it's in the Google Suite.
Yes, yeah, it's in the Google Suite. So if you're on your phone, you do have to download an app. I would recommend just going on to a desktop client and you don't download anything, which is great. But yes, it's Google Suite whiteboard. So, okay, advertising promotions. Allison, do you want to start us off? Okay.
Yeah, I'll kick us off. So a couple of things here. One, we want to talk about co-op. Given the results we saw in ABACUS, it was clear to us that people are leaving some money on the table when it comes to co-op. So we want to make sure, A, that you're putting in for co-op, B, that you're following up to make sure you received the co-op you were owed. Double check. Sometimes you will catch that it didn't come through. Also, are you collecting indirect co-op? So if you're ordering books from Ingram, you can ask your rep to enable the indirect co-op on iPage, and you can get an indirect co-op report to submit to publishers to claim co-op for the books you ordered through Ingram. So that's an important thing to do. And then we want to talk for a second about some of the companies that are out there that will help you collect co-op. There are a couple, and we'll add these to the Jamboard. And these are companies that can collect co-op on your behalf, and they just get a percentage of that revenue. So those are the kinds of things that could help you get started, perhaps. But co-op is such an important service that you're offering the publishers. You're getting paid to market their books. And we want to make sure that everyone's taking advantage of that opportunity. We also want to talk about non-traditional advertising. In the past, we talked about print and radio and things like that. There are so many opportunities for independent bookstores to get visibility and publicity for their stores by sharing what they're good at. So writing an op-ed about what your store cares about, issues that are important to you, not only brings visibility to your store, but visibility to your mission or your purpose, perhaps. Definitely sharing your bestseller lists with local newspapers or local bloggers can be really valuable. We've found stores finding sponsorships from companies and organizations that recognize the value of the demographic that shops with independent booksellers. I think that's an important one. And then just all kinds of partnerships that may give you the opportunity to promote your business in different ways. So non-traditional advertising and turnkey marketing assets. So there are so many marketing assets that ABA is creating all the time. We push them out in BTW, they live on BookWeb, but I can't say enough about how great the team is that produces all of this content that you can share with your customers, like the Indie Next List, the Kids Next List, the Children's Catalog, the Genre Gift Catalog. The list goes on. And then you'll also see all the marketing assets that we produce that are turnkey for your social media to promote early buying for the holiday season or promote Valentine's Day, all of these types of things. Independent Bookstore Day is a huge marketing opportunity. If it's something that your store doesn't really participate in because you did in the past and didn't really work, or you're not really sure what to do, Please, please, please challenge that assumption. We have stores who tell us that it is the biggest sales day of their year, that it's like adding another holiday to the calendar. If you have questions about how to optimize it, please, please, please reach out to ABA. There are so many great examples of stores doing amazing things, and we really want to keep building this as a holiday, as a celebration of independent book selling. And it's a great way to market not only your store, but the entire channel.
Yeah, in Seattle, Independent Bookstore Day is essentially the same as like a Saturday before Christmas, just dropped into April, which can be a little disorienting for staff by all means, but it's such a fun day. And Seattle does a big bookstore tour, which even if you don't live in an urban center that has a lot of different bookstores, we've seen a lot of stores teaming up with other bookstores across the state and creating an entire weekend-long bookstore tour. So there are a lot of opportunities, even if you don't have an urban store, for Independent Bookstore Day. Also, I'd like to point out that ABA has an official mascot. That's on a lot of our ABA marketing resources now. And yes, it is a cat named Stax, and that was not my fault. So Allison is just surrounded by cat people.
You choose your battles.
So, telecommunications. There are obviously not a ton of options in the old world of business for phones. It seems, again, not a very sexy thing to talk about, but you've got your 800 number, you've got your local number, etc. Now, thank you, Internet, there are actually a lot of different options. ABA just switched over to Zoom, so VoIP. For all of our internet communications. I know that stores have been using Google for a long time. Hannah at Loyalty Books has talked about the fact that they used Google forever ago, and that allowed them to have a native texting app immediately on their computers. Staff weren't having to use their own phones for things. So there are a lot of different opportunities. If you don't want to be, if you're paying for an 800 number, that probably isn't necessary anymore, and being able to use this as an opportunity to go back to your provider and renegotiate your contracts. That's the thing you can do every year.
Yeah, if you still have traditional phones, make sure that every 6 months you're going back to your phone provider, whether it's AT&T or someone else, and renegotiate, because they are most definitely raising your rates every 6 months, whether you notice it or not.
Mm-hmm. Professional services. This is something that our dear CFO PK is adamant about, and we are in fact going to have a great session about when and how to hire experts at Winter Institute in Seattle this coming year. So this is mostly just PK's public service announcement, PK's PSA, if you will, that CPA and a bookkeeper and a data entry person are 3 separate things that should be used in 3 separate ways and will in fact cost you 3 different amounts of money. So if you have your bookkeeper entering your invoices, you are probably leaving money on the table or giving too much money of yours away to somebody who in fact could be a bookseller who might need a remote opportunity for, you know, some afternoons in the week, could eventually become your data entry person instead of having to outsource that to a bookkeeper or a CPA. So making sure that you understand the difference between those 3 is crucial, and figuring out who you should be paying for what. Allison, did you want to? Okay.
I think we're entering speed round.
Yes, exactly.
Time. Yeah.
Office expenses and supplies. This is where your olives for that piece of paper you always send to the accounting department, because you don't mess with the accounting department. If they tell you to do something, you do it. This is where that comes from. So things that I've found really useful is we designated a supply czar at my store, and it meant that all of a sudden, instead of us just frantically ordering more receipt paper every time we ran out entirely and had no receipt paper left, all of a sudden we had somebody who was actually tracking that. They were doing price comparisons, and we were making sure that we weren't just like panicking and going to Staples. We could also figure out actually the best cost for that. ABA does have partnerships with WG Ellenkamp, who provides bags, those great Eat, Sleep, Read bags. We do have a partnership program with them, so you can get things for a little cheaper. Allison, I'm just going to keep going, so just hop in if you need to. Travel and entertainment. When you're using credit cards, if you can use your credit card to pay bills, there are a couple publishers that still let you do that. You get some cash back if you're on the correct credit card plan. Make sure you get cash back and travel points so that, for example, you can come visit me in Seattle. So using credit cards strategically in that way is really helpful. Business insurance, again, this is for the business, not for the booksellers. But we do have a partnership with the formerly Libris, now called the Booksellers Insurance Program, which provides coverage for things like flooding at sprinkler systems. I know that Allison has talked about before of like
not that specific example, but their insurance program does cover, it's your liability, your property, all of those types of things. And it's a really great program, and you can use it with your local broker. They can take advantage of it. So you can still shop locally for this, but have them help you with it. The sprinkler example is actually something that I'm not sure they do cover, which was my point, that you want to be careful when you're shopping for insurance, that your specific needs are, being considered. So, for example, having a store in California where there were earthquakes, sprinkler leakage was something that was a concern for me, and not every insurance company covers that. I think the main thing about insurance is you want to make sure you're being mindful of auto renewals, that you're revisiting it and shopping it or having your broker shop it every year, that you're making sure that the ABA Partner Booksellers Insurance Program is the best scenario for your particular needs. And then the other thing I would say is that there's the insurance that kind of falls into its own category. It's not insurance that you pay for directly, but it is absolutely something that's meant to protect your store. So I'm thinking here of cybersecurity and how critical it is that you're proactive with staff to train them on everything from changing passwords regularly to avoiding phishing scams. And that training once or twice a year can save you a lot of money in the long run.
Absolutely. Credit cards are another really good opportunity for those olives. I was talking to a store that they had been just offhandedly mentioned to one of their staff that credit card processing fees were taking 2.5 or 2.5% off of every single transaction, and it absolutely boggled this staff member. They were like, "Oh, so when somebody comes up to the register and says, would you prefer cash or credit?" My answer has always been like, meh. But the answer is, for this store, they were like, yeah, actually, like, ask for cash, because for us, it makes more sense. And we don't have that 2.5% transaction fee that's taken away from every single transaction. Most credit card processing fees typically are between that 1.5 and 3.5%. ABA does, in fact, have a partnership with Gravity Payments that I believe is 2.4% for credit card processing. So if you are over that, check out Gravity Payments. If not, that might be a good opportunity, again, to be able to see just some for small margins, abilities for frontline booksellers to really make a huge difference.
Yeah, so with Gravity, it's 2.4% plus the 23 per transaction for online, and there's a different scenario for in-store transactions, but you'll definitely want to take a look at it, because for some stores, it's the best deal you'll find. We've already pre-negotiated it for you. For other stores, you may be able to, based on your volume, negotiate an even better deal using our deal as a base. And for other stores, still, you may decide for whatever reason you want to go elsewhere. You can use the fact that your trade association has this to leverage a better deal with another company, perhaps. So it's something to just really get your hands into, because as Kim said, it really adds up.
And one of the recommendations that came in on this board from the regionals, if you are doing a B2B order with somebody, ask how they're going to pay, because Jamie from Flyleaf actually mentioned that she will quote 3% less if they're going to be paying for bulk orders by check instead of credit card, because she understands, or for credit card instead of check, because she understands that she's not going to have to deal with that processing fee. So
we heard on the road is we have talked to a couple of stores who have started charging a little bit extra if you pay by credit card. I'm sure many of you have experienced this at like the dry cleaners or a hair salon, where they say if you pay with a credit card, there's an extra fee. So something to think about.
Absolutely. Okay. The dues and subscriptions, again, not a ton that flexibility here, but your Chamber of Commerce does actually offer a ton of benefits probably that they're kind of hidden. I know that they can possibly offer vision insurance, HR hotlines. We in Seattle, there's a great public transportation program through Orca that gives you as a business a better rate on public transportation passes to incentivize that among staff. So there's some really good opportunities that you might be leaving on the table there as well. And then freight out, again, we already talked about media mail versus FedEx. ABA does have a partnership program with both Partnership and TSI. And then whether or not you're using stamps.com or Pirate Ship or Ship Easy, there's a lot of promo offers. I know that we started using stamps.com because there was a podcast promo that I signed up for with the store. So, so which one's actually right for you? Which one can you get the best deals on? We don't need to necessarily have to go to the post office every single time. Maybe labor is too much for that, and you can actually go through something that is an online one. So, I want to give us just a couple minutes now to go back to our session and finish up the part about that little number differentiation at the end. So we're back here on our income statement. We're looking at the 0.9% was the end net operating profit on our income statement earlier. And then all of a sudden, we just magically bumped up to 6.4%. So what's happening in that magic zone there? The difference between those two numbers is a couple additional things that come out that aren't necessarily operational. So bookshop.org proceeds, COVID relief funds that you're getting from the government, other income. This is going to be things like GoFundMe, fundraisers, things like if you are
Film shoots,
yeah, affiliate things, stuff like that. So and then so really the two ones that I think are really important here are those bookshop.org proceeds and the COVID relief funds. So if you are not signed up for bookshop.org as in the affiliate program, we're getting that 30%. You should absolutely make sure you're doing that because it is a huge percentage that you're able to get. But one of the things that we have seen nationally in the past year is that e-commerce trends are going down. So while that has been an incredible opportunity for stores over the last few years, do note that consumer behavior is indicating that a lot of folks are moving off of e-commerce and getting back in the stores, which is good for a lot of reasons, but also means that we can't rely on that particular funding stream going forward. We're still going to get some of it, but it's probably not going to be as robust as it has been. The big one here is that 3.7% that you're seeing for the COVID relief funds. That is going away. So while we can be really excited that we bumped that 0.9% up to 6.4, and we can be really proud of all the work that independent bookstores have been doing over the last year because it has been a year. While we can be really proud of that, we do want to kind of end on a cautious note about that last number there. We are talking about olives because we need every one of those percentage points. That 3.7% from the government relief funds is going to be going away, and we can't rely on that as an income stream anymore. So making sure that we're actually paying a little more attention to that 0.9% up at the top, while recognizing all the work that went into the 6.4% at the bottom.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is that, one of the big takeaways here from the ABACUS results was Bookshop and what a significant difference it did make for stores. As Kim said, we really strongly urge stores to sign up to take advantage of the pool money, any physical independent bookstore. So whether you're brick and mortar or pop-up or mobile, if you're an ABA member, you're eligible to be part of that pool. It costs you nothing to participate in it, and you receive money, and it's totally worthwhile. The other thing is that you can consider having an affiliate page on Bookshop, and we've seen stores partner with Bookshop in this way in all kinds of creative ways that are absolutely helping drive business and create new customers for them. So we urge you to reach out to ABA or to Bookshop to find out best practices around that.
Absolutely. And we will have education on that at Winter Institute as well. Okay, a couple quick, because we're booksellers still, we have to recommend some books. So The Accounting Game, Allison recommended this to me. It breaks down basic business finances in a really helpful way through a lemonade stand. You can pretend they're books, not lemons. The Accounting for the Number Phobic is actually a really great book that I got a lot of information on from financial statements or about financial statements. It came out a while back, but I was able to find a copy at King's Books in Tacoma. And then Finance for the People, Paco de Leon has a fantastic website called the Hell Yeah Group that has a bunch of really good articles on small business finances. I blatantly stole a bunch of Paco's illustrations throughout the course of this slide deck because I cannot draw, which is why there are so many cats. So please do check out Finance for the People is a really great primer on personal finance. And then the Hell Yeah Group has some really good information about small business finance as well. Paco also has a whole bookkeeping small business firm as well that I highly recommend. And then information on our email addresses if you want to reach out to either Allison or myself individually. PK, our CFO, is also a fantastic resource and has walked so many booksellers through financial statements over the years. So he is a really good resource to have. And Allison thought that dog looked sad. So here's a picture of my cat instead. She's cute.
So close. We hope that for many of you, this content was really helpful in helping you understand bookstore financials a little better, understand P&L a little better, understand some of the terminology a little better. And for others who had a little more experience going in, we hope that this was a good example of how you can talk about financials in your store and how to go about the process of just being quiet, sitting with your P&L, sitting with ABACUS, starting to challenge your assumptions and ask important questions that will yield better profitability.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Allison, for developing this with me and for putting up with my cats.
Thank you, Kim, very much.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Bookstore Education Podcast, brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA website at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!